Well, I'm joined here with Bryan Crum. Welcome to the Upside Down People podcast. How are you going today?
Thanks, Caleb. I am so excited to talk with you today. I've been looking forward to this just all week, so it's great to be chatting with you today.
I'm so thankful you've been looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to it as well. First conversation for me for this week. Really looking forward to unpacking a bit of your journey, your insights, what you do. I know you've currently released a book that you've authored, your first book, and it's got great reviews so far and even forwarded by Bob Goff as well. But before we dive into that, Bryan, something I love doing with our guests is just adding some flesh to the voice or for our audience. Tell us something that you find that people may find surprising or interesting about yourself.
One interesting thing is I wrote a book before this one that was actually banned from my daughter's Christian school for foul language. And
Really?
it's interesting because, I'm a man of the cloth, so to speak. I'm a hospice chaplain, and to have a book that you wrote as a Christian man banned for bad words is just surreal.
I have to ask, what were the bad words that got it banned?
I love that that's the first question people ask when I tell that story. They, in my mind, they're not foul. That's why I wrote them. But the book was about this runaway diaper rash and the lengths that a doctor and a nurse go to treat it. So it's this kid's book, this children's story that I told and made up as a bedtime story for my daughter. And since it's about a runaway diaper rash, the title of the book is Stripy Bottom. So the illustrator did a great job, and she illustrated this rash as these colorful stripes on the baby's backside.
Right.
So the word bottom, I guess, is something you cannot say in Christian education.
Yeah, I've learned something new today. That's crazy. Hopefully, the first thought that came to my mind was a zebra or something. So who knows what else is being banned?
Yeah, and then, once you say the word bottom, you need other descriptive terms for that part of your anatomy. And so I use the word butt crack. And I guess bottom and butt crack, especially if you use those together, you cannot have your book read in Christian schools. So we learned that.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's fascinating. So did it get independently published outside of that? Have people been able to get their hands on a copy of that?
It's so funny because you can buy it on Amazon,
right?
Independently published. And when I've been traveling and talking about this book that we're going to talk about today, that story comes up a lot about Stripy Bottom. And so it's funny to see folks want to buy that book as I'm talking about a real Christian book.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll get into the one that hasn't been banned in a second. So tell us a bit about yourself. What you mentioned, you're a hospice chaplain or were a hospice chaplain. That's obviously something that I feel like is very foreign for many people. What does that look like? How did you get yourself into that?
Yeah, so my job as a hospice chaplain was to visit people that had just found out they were terminally ill. So I'd often spend the final weeks or months, sometimes just only days, with someone who had found out they were going to pass away. And I'd sit and listen to them tell their life story. And what happened is I ended up hearing hundreds of life stories. And I discovered there's a theme between a lot of our stories. And it's not the best one, because near the end, I found that too many of us don't like our story. We get to the end of our lives and we don't like the life that we've lived.
Mm.
And so I found this deep passion to help folks fall in love with God's greatest creation. That's us. Because
Awesome.
I know he did not intend for us to live a life that we regretted or that we didn't love. And so
Wow.
that's what's been born out of this. But my job started just visiting with folks and sitting and listening to them tell their stories. And I think, like a lot of us, you don't plan to get into something like that. It's something God maybe leads you to, and
Right.
you go a little bit reluctantly at first, and then you kind of fall in love with where He's brought you. And that's the way it happened for me. It was back in the 90s when I started this work.
Wow.
So back then you replied to job ads in the newspaper. Can you believe how old that is? So,
That's
um,
brilliant. Yeah.
and
How? Carry on.
that was the way it got started for me, is just the response to a newspaper ad.
That's insane. Yeah, very different these days. You find it through LinkedIn or job seek apps or things like that. But to find yourself in a place where so many people, I feel like you mentioned they get to the end of the life and there's this regret, but then also for people to find themselves working in that space, I could imagine it being very challenging when you're surrounded by death and the finality of life. Was that difficult or confronting for you? And then also just the tension. What tension did people journey with that their own story coming to an end?
Yeah, I found that the biggest thing that we all carry is regrets. You know, we have something we wished we'd done better, or something we wanted to do and never did. And so a
Mm,
lot of the conversations I had were around that. And some of them were, could be rather sad. And so after you work in that environment a lot, you're reproving to yourself your own faith, like,
mm.
this is why we live the way we do. This is who I believe in. And so I walked away from it some days tired, emotionally spent, but
Mm.
reaffirmed in the fact that Jesus is everything and definitely our joy in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, wow. And did you did you ever come across any like encouraging stories where people really hung on to the hope that they have in Jesus and sort of had that like Pauline moment where it's like to live as Christ, to die as gain?
There were definitely powerful stories where you'd meet folks and they'd lived this incredible life for God. There were certainly moments to celebrate. The one that just I love to talk about is I walked into this woman's room one day in the hospital, and she's in her final moments. Her family has gathered around the bed, and her name is Miss Ruth. And I find out that Miss Ruth had been in this unconscious state for days. She had not
Wow.
been responsive because the body was just shutting down, and she's nearing the end of her physical journey. Uh, but as we surrounded the bed, her daughters said, "Would you pray with us?" And yes, of course I will. And so we gather in a kind of a horseshoe pattern around the bed, and we hold hands, and I say a prayer. And when I say amen, Miss Ruth, who's been asleep for days, wakes up and says amen. And
Wow.
it was it sucked the wind out of the room. um, the daughters, who had been crying and sad, I could feel their hands shaking in mine. They were
Mm.
crying because these were final moments with their mom.
Mm.
All of a sudden, they have these surprised looks on their faces. And one of the daughters says, "We're right here, Mom. We're right here." And Miss Ruth says, "I see you, but one of you is bright."
Wow.
And the daughter says, "No, this is Bryan." you know, Last time I'm accused of being bright, right? Like, this is Bryan. He's just come to pray with you. And Miss Ruth says, "No, I see him and I see you, but one of you is bright." And we watched as Miss Ruth held up her hand and her fingers closed in, her thumb pointed in. Someone was holding Miss Ruth's hand.
Wow.
And I've spoken with the skeptics. I know, a lot of folks will say, "Oh, that was a dream or a hallucination," but I just believe after seeing so many people in these final moments that every once in a while our Creator sends someone to welcome us home. I don't know
Brilliant.
if it was an angel or Jesus himself, took a break from his work in heaven and went and to meet and welcome Miss Ruth home. But I think if we roll out red carpets for dignitaries on earth when they come to visit, why wouldn't heaven roll out the red carpet for someone who's worth the life of Jesus Christ?
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
I've been privileged to witness that a few times in this hospice work.
That's super powerful. And even just thinking of, like you're saying, just the kindness of God to bring closure to the daughters. Like that's made what they needed, just that response from their mum, that seeing their mum certain and assured and longing and looking forward to, like you're saying, this hope, holding out her hands. It's would have done
Yeah.
something in them as well, which is just kindness on both sides, right? God rolling out the red carpet, embracing and just thinking of those involved as well.
So true. And I need that, Caleb. I need to know this isn't the end, because the older you get, the more tired you get, the more aches you feel. And like, it can't end like this. We have to have something better to hold on to. So it's nice to think that through.
Brilliant. So just off the back of that, then how do you feel then about death? And I feel like everyone, it's something that no one can escape. Everyone will find death at some point in their life. How you've been working with people for years on their deathbeds. What has that done
hmm
to you? How has that shaped your view of what's to come?
It's one of those things where you have to put your money where your mouth is. Like, you have to really decide, do I believe this or not? Because it's easy when we gather in our churches to say, death is not the end, I believe. But
Yeah.
when you are in your final moments, it's a different story. And so to have to reprove that again and again to myself has been life-changing. And now I have this confidence that not everybody has. A lot of us don't, because we just don't deal in that every day.
Yeah.
But there is another world waiting for us, and it's so much better than this one. And I firmly believe that.
Yeah. What? Just while you're thinking, I mean, I'm really wanting to get into the thoughts from your book in a second. But another question, like this idea of death is so countercultural to the Western context we had both find ourselves in. I feel like ignore we ignore death, we ignore suffering and pain and
Mm.
all of those things. It sort of challenges the good life, what life's supposed to
Mhm.
look like. Should be pain free. There shouldn't be suffering. There shouldn't be dying. Um, I read somewhere that I think in Orange County, one of the number one gifts for a 16-year-old girl was just body modification. So it's this idea that
Mm.
people are trying to escape something, like your body
Mhm.
ages. What's an encouragement or a thought or even a challenge that you would have from your experience to speak into um, this cultural obsession we have to deny the obvious?
Yeah, that's so powerful. Especially, I'm a dad too, and my daughter is 16. So I have a 16-year-old daughter. And so those kind of topics are so much a part of our conversation every day right now, because I have a daughter who's trying to figure out, how does she compare to the people at school? Is she beautiful? Is she awkward? Is she, insecure? And so I've been able to have these kind of conversations with her, and just to say, here's how God sees you.
Wow.
It's much different than we see ourselves, because when God looks at us, he sees this beautiful creation. And so we've been talking about that a lot. Like, when God made us, he took a step back in the Garden of Eden and he said, it's very good. And for some reason, we are covering up God's very good with our own opinions that they're not accurate and they don't matter as much. But I think as we listen to all the noise that's coming from the different voices around us, they're telling us, you need to modify this part of yourself or improve this piece of who you are. And God says, no, I made you perfectly. You're exactly what I want. You're beautiful in every way. You're worth dying for. You're that valuable. And so I've been having those conversations real time with my daughter, and it's been interesting. But I think a lot of us are on that page. We're looking in the mirror and we're wondering about some aspect of ourselves and thinking, I wish that didn't look the way it does, or I wish I maybe looked a little differently. And I think we need to stop giving our mirrors so much power.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's a good sort of, I know your book's about revealing and understanding about your worth and your value. So tell us about Neighbor, Love Yourself, Discover Your Value, Live Your Worth. What motivated you to write this book? And what's sort of been the impact of it since you've written it?
Absolutely. It really did start with these hospice stories. The book is filled with all this advice that I never could give anyone because I hadn't lived these experiences. But I knew, as I sat and heard all of these folks give their wisdom to me, that I needed to write it down and I needed to share it with people because I knew they'd benefit. So there's a lot of stories and advice and wisdom in this book from other people about things they've done well and things that they wish they'd done better. And then there's a lot of humor in it too. The story of Stripey Bottom is in there. There's a lot of really funny moments because life is that way. It's serious and it's fun and it's meant to be funny too. And so I wanted the book to read that way. So it's this collection of wisdom and laughter, and definitely some moments that will make you cry as well because they're emotionally moving. But I had this moment every night with my daughter when she was very little. We had this ritual where I would tell her a bedtime story. And every night I wanted to just pour good words into her. I just was seeing kind of what we've been talking about, even at her early age, how she's wondering who she is. And I wanted just every night to pour some good words into her. So I just spend a few moments as soon as the nightlight came on and we had done the extra drink and the extra story and the one more song. That's the way it goes with daughters. But I finally would say, what I love about Casey, my daughter? I would say, I love how you treat little kids. I love how you love your mother. I love what a great singer you are. I love just how beautiful you are. I would just spend a few minutes pouring good words into her. And what I discovered is we all need that. It makes a huge difference when you think about how powerful good words are. Like, state champions, or she said yes when you propose, right? Or or it's a girl, it's a boy when the baby is born. Like there are these statements that the words are so powerful, our
Yeah.
faces light up, our cheeks blush red, our heart actually speeds up. And I just have realized we all need good words like that to keep us going. And so this book, that's what it is. It's a bunch
Awesome.
of great and good words to pour into you and keep you moving forward in your faith.
That's brilliant. And I think it picks up on like you've mentioned, these core sort of fundamental ideas that I feel all humanity faces is these questions of meaning and purpose and how we wrestle with those. So how important is it for someone to find meaning and purpose? And maybe even
Mm.
taking a step back is what is meaning and purpose? What does that look like to find that?
Yeah, I think we overcomplicate that. Just from my vantage point of hearing a lot of life stories, I think we find purpose by you do something that you find fulfilling, that you get some energy from, and then that's your cue to do more of that. And
Yeah,
as we do more and more of those things that God places on our heart and gives us energy for, that's when we start to find the things that we're passionate about. And that's when we find our purpose. The things that I've ran into the most are people that heard that or felt that urge or that nudge and they didn't do it. And when that happens, we have regret, we have doubt. And one of the biggest things I've encountered in hospice work is self-doubt, is
wow.
people just wish they had done something and didn't, or they said something to their dad when they were young and they wish they could take those words back. These doubts about what we wish we had done and what we actually did are huge. And what I've discovered is doubt is like a goat. And if you have been around goats at all, and I don't
I've been
own a
around a
goat.
couple of wild goats.
Okay, good, good. So you have more experience than I do with the livestock piece. But goats, at least what I know from reading and seeing goats on TV, yes, is that goats will eat everything we feed them, and they
Right.
keep coming back for more. And that's doubt. Doubt will
Wow.
eat everything we serve it and continue to come back for seconds. And so my mantra now is we've got to put doubt on a diet. We've got to stop feeding the goat our dreams and our plans and our self-esteem. And as we do, that goat's going to get a little bit lighter, a little bit skinnier, and lose the weight that it has in our lives.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's spot on. Hey, Brian. Self-doubt, especially for my generation, is something that's so impactful. Something so many people wrestle with, and
Mm.
even for Gen Z as well. And like you see the rise of anxiety as well, which is tied to doubt as well. Is when you have this anxiousness, and the question then is how do you starve the goat of self-doubt? What does that look like? Is it as simple as you have an idea and just going with it regardless of whether you fail or not, or what's been your experience?
My experience is we have to write in truth and erase fiction. I saw this on a news story one night that this house caught fire and it burned like for 5 hours. These flames burned this house down to nothing left but the wooden beams, the two
Wow.
by fours that were holding it up. And when the flames reached the wooden beams, they stopped. The fire stopped. And the firemen were interviewed on this news program and they were dumbfounded. They're like, we went in with hoses and water and did what we always do for hours. And finally the flames stopped. But when they reached these wooden beams, they couldn't explain it. And when they shone their lights through the smoke and the debris, they found that when the owners of the house built the house, they had written scripture on the beams of the house. And so the fire literally reached these scripture that were written in Sharpie marker and stopped. And again, you talk to the skeptics and they're like, there's got to be a way to explain it. The lumber was treated with something, or I don't know, but to me, that's another moment where we either believe this or we don't. And what I believe is that the word of God has fire stopping power in our lives. And you think doubt definitely will burn us if we allow it. And so our job for combating that goat, not to mix metaphors, is to say what's true and what's false. Because when we write the true words, the true opinion of God in our lives, when we encounter that, we can see that it stops doubt dead in its tracks. It's when we believe the things that are not true that doubt really burns us and steals our self-esteem. And so the job is this: look inside yourself. There are beams that hold our lives up too. And let's erase the fiction and write in truth. Let's write in God's opinion and erase the things that we've said about ourselves.
Yeah, brilliant. And so beginning that journey then, what's some of those lies or those untruths that people commonly tell themselves that need to be erased?
I've found that they usually start with the word not. You think about all the things you doubt in yourself. So it's usually, I'm not beautiful enough, or I'm not talented enough, I'm not smart enough. We could make a long list of nots. And so I think when God looks at us, he doesn't see the knots. He just sees beautiful enough, smart enough, talented enough, because he made us that way. And so we've got to somehow get rid of the knots in our lives, because they're really, it's almost like my children's book, that one or two foul words are holding back our whole story. Knots are like that. One or two knots will hold back our entire story. So we probably should treat knots like foul language.
Right. Yeah. Just get rid of them.
Right.
Yeah, brilliant. What would you say then in terms of looking in yourself and finding those pillars? I think one of them that you've mentioned is seeing how God sees us and sort of seeing what he says about our humanity, how he's made us in his own image, and that we are good. Like he delights in his children. So how do we love ourselves in the way that God intended?
I think we start to look at ourselves the way he sees us. And a lot of us are looking for how much we're worth. We're actually looking for a number, it feels like. How much do I make in my job, or how much is my house worth? How much am I worth to society? We're often looking for a number, but I think if you rolled back the layers of our physicality and you really looked at our price tag, there's no number there. It's just a name, just one name. It just says Jesus. And that's the thing. I think we've got to come to terms with our price is Jesus. That's exactly what we're worth to God, because he gave the life of his son for us. And so it sounds like something you read on a greeting card, right? We're worth the life of Jesus. But the more we live that, the more we start to see, I am worth the Savior of the world. I'm worth the life of Christ. That's a big thing in our lives. It changes how we live. It changes how we see ourselves. And we start to fall in love with who we are. And when we do, amazing thing happens. We're empowered to love the people around us, because I start to see their price tag as I'm interacting with them, and I start to realize they have the same name written on their price tag that I
Yeah,
do.
that's brilliant. I love that. It's something. Yeah, I think that's countercultural in itself as well, or upside down in the sense of our culture tells us to know our worth, to look at within. There's this message of self-love, self-awareness, all these things that are good things, but their end is essentially ourselves, and it doesn't lead to really looking at others in the same way. But if we look into ourselves and see that our worth is, like you're saying, Jesus, then when we're looking at others, the dignity and the respect and the love that we really look at ourselves with is the same thing that we're going to extend to others. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
So true. That's so true.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that more people can really. I feel like it would just shift the culture where within churches, within workspaces, within all these different areas, if people are able to, just look at themselves through a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
Like without oversimplifying it, practically, what does that look like when you do find yourself in a culture that says very much like, you do need to look after yourself and don't worry about what other people are saying.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Sometimes I think it's it's not simple. The answer to state it is simple. The solution is not. But sometimes I think we need a better group of folks around us. We need a different circle of friends or a different peer network. And replacing that is really difficult sometimes. I understand that. But it's so worth it, especially when you do that and you look back from the other side. But I think it's right now, my daughter's learning to drive. Ultimate test of faith, by the way.
Right.
Just to buckle in beside a brand new driver. Oh, man. And we're driving down the highway and I'm realizing the only thing that separates me from another car driving at me at a high rate of speed is a painted line on the ground. Like, this is not good.
Man. Yeah.
So it will test your faith. But I found she was learning to drive and she did well with lots of things. But right now she's doing probably the worst thing. She's mixing up the pedals. So
right. Yeah.
when we can be driving at pretty fast and she will slam the brake, and it just throws you into the windshield. And I am wearing a seatbelt. It's, don't get me wrong, but I think that's it though for us. Like we do too many of the things in our life that hit the brakes. We've mixed up the pedals, the things that really keep us moving forward in our faith. Sometimes it's the people in our circle around us. And if we're not moving forward, if we're feeling like the brakes are throwing us into the windshield, we might need a different group of friends. We might need a different setting to call home. So just something that's hard to do, but something to think about.
So important. Yeah, I think you're right. That community aspect is so important. And it is something that, I feel like I look back on my life and I feel like I've been really blessed compared to others in terms of the people that I've been surrounded with. And not many people have that privilege. And it's sort of, you're right. Like the people we surround ourselves with do shape how we respond to things, how we, our trajectory, just the way our capacity is. But it is I really do empathize with people because it's like, as humans, we're made for connection. So it's like cutting off a connection feels really, it feels wrong, right? It's like, well, how do I cut off a connection and then find a new one? And I think maybe the answer is, like you're saying, it's that step of faith. It's trusting in that God has you. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely hard. And I definitely have met with people who struggled with that on a deep level. Thinking of a lady I met in her 70s, and she was still hung up on something her dad had said to her when she was very little. Her dad had said she was worthless, she wasn't worth anything, she'd never amount to anything. And here I'm meeting with her as an elderly woman, and she's still hurt by something her father said when she was about 8 years old. And I think her big struggle was she didn't believe a heavenly father could love her because her earthly father never loved her. And we need to take a step back and look at our relationships in maybe a lens like that. Because if someone has told you something about yourself that isn't true, or if someone is not valuing you the way that you really should be valued, that affects us. And we need to look at our lives and ourselves through God's eyes more and start to realize that is the actual reality. And the thing that I was told when I was 8, that's the lie. It's hard to work through. I won't lie to you, but that's the work we need to do, because as we do that, we're going to discover this incredible richness, this incredible wealth that's inside of us, and God's the one who planted it there.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think good things don't come easy, right? There's something to be said about like the bearing fruit. It takes time. You have to plant the seed, you have to water it, you have to then wait. And in the same things, like these good things that God gives us, like community, it doesn't happen easily. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and intentionality, and and I think I'm glad that you said like it doesn't come easy, because it's something that is worthwhile investing into. So with that, another question that I had with regards to your book is what was something that you really enjoyed writing about within it? Was there anything particularly that it just stood out to you, a thought, a theme, and you're just so excited to share it with people?
It's so funny. I reached the end of it. It's about 19 chapters. And I got to the end of it and looked back through it, and I realized God definitely orchestrated this, because there's a chapter for everyone. Like, this is a book about you. This is, if you're dealing with something that you're worried about inside yourself, or if you have anxiety, if you have, this lack of self-esteem, if you have a lack of confidence, there's a chapter in this book about you, like for you. And so I got really excited because I discovered that we each have an audience God prepares us for, and then he aligns us with that audience, and we get to speak his words to them. And there's a story in the book about Buzz Aldrin landing on the surface of the moon. And I never knew this, but did you know the first food ever eaten on the moon was communion?
Wow.
I did not know that. So I guess the lunar lander touches down on the moon, and it's been a stressful ride to get there. And so NASA tells the astronauts, take a break. And they take a break. And during this break, Buzz Aldrin decides to have communion.
Wow.
And it ends up not planned per se, but this communion is broadcast to one of the largest audiences ever assembled, because all of these people are stopping what they're doing to watch the men land on the moon.
That is crazy.
I think that's the way it is for us. We'll probably never sit on the surface of the moon. It probably won't broadcast to, most of the world. But I do think God has an audience for us, and we just need to hold tight to, there's a story that you have to tell in your life, and it's going to mean something to someone around you. And when God turns on the mic and you see the light is lit to speak, go for it. Tell your story, because I know we're going to benefit from hearing it. And that's what I got excited about most, is
Awesome.
realizing this book is that. Like, God has brought this book to audiences around the world, and it's because there's a chapter in it just for you.
That's brilliant. And in the process of writing it, had you wrestled yourself with self-doubt or anxiety, or just those questions I feel like so many creatives find themselves asking, the inner critic inside saying, are people even, is this going to even help people? Are those things that you had to wrestle with?
Yeah, for sure. I think I started out writing, like envisioning my daughter and my wife, like what would I say to them? What would I want them to know? And then I envisioned other folks, like at my church, and that kind of an audience. But honestly, I think, Caleb, toward the end, I realized I'm writing to myself. I have self-doubt. I have regret. I have things I wish I had done that I didn't do yet, or, things that I said that I wish I'd said better. And so, yeah, I think this is definitely a theme woven in where I was writing to myself as well.
Ah, brilliant. I think that makes something really impactful, because it adds that sense of humanity threaded throughout, as people can actually sense that the story's nearer to them than they can understand. It's like they're reading into it themselves. I love it when that the author does that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, Final sort of question is, what is your, if there's an ultimate hope for people that are reading it, what's your ultimate hope that they get out of it?
I think it's this. A guy went to talk to Jesus once, and he said, "What's the most important thing?" And Jesus said, "That's easy. Love God, love others." But when he gave that answer, there's something we missed, because he says, "Love others, but love them like you love yourself." And for me, that's the disconnect, because we haven't fallen in love with ourselves. So to our earthly ears, that almost sounds like an ego thing. You can't love yourself and be a Christian. That's egotistical. But Jesus says, no, this is just understanding. We're just understanding how we're made. We're understanding how valuable we are, because when we do, we discover we're empowered to love others and to love God better. So I think that's the big wish of this book, is that it will help you fall in love with God's greatest creation, not in an ego way, just in a deeper understanding way, because as you do, you're going to be empowered to love the people in your house, the people on your street, the people in your church. You're going to love them better.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. And that's almost the litmus test for humility as well, is this self-assurance and confidence in God, and then that willingness to be obedient to God and put others before yourself. But it comes from that self-assurance, that knowing that I'm loved, knowing how to love yourself, and then loving others. I love
That's right.
that. So if people are curious to find out more about yourself, Bryan, or grab a copy of your book, where would you direct them to?
Oh, yeah. There's two great websites you can check out. Neighborloveyourself.com will give you all kinds of places you can order the book at. It's in a lot of stores, a lot of just platforms all around the world at this point. And then you can definitely check out my website, bryancrum.com. A lot of motivational things, just inspirational things that keep you moving forward. Also, check out my Facebook page too. Try to put something out every day that'll put a smile on your face or just a spring in your step to keep you moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Bryan. And just, I love the optimistic hope that you have, and that it's not empty like a balloon that you pop it, but it's filled with Jesus. And I think that's something so important to have in this day and age, where you look to the media and it's filled with negativity, it's filled with doubt, it's filled with this all-consuming anxiety and fear. And I just love how, this conversation has been filled with lightness, and we haven't necessarily glazed over difficult topics either, but there's that hope in Jesus, which is beautiful. So thanks so much for carving out the time and having this conversation.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk with you, Caleb. It's always fun to sit and talk with someone who's found their audience and who's just leading in just a powerful way with such a bright light. So just an honor to chat with you today.